Welcome to Whisperwood Stories. Thank you for all of your patience with my sporadic uploads. Hopefully I will be able to get things normal soon. Today we read 3 true scary stories. 2 from r/backwoodscreepy and 1 from r/paranormal. Let's begin. Our first story is from Throwaway. They knew we were there. This happened when I was 15, near Algonquin Park. My father and I were driving up to our cottage in the middle of winter. I always was so amazed at the beauty of Algonquin Park and Muskoka, and had grown up enjoying the beauty of it every summer. Our cottage was on a large lake, about a 30-minute drive from the nearest town. There were probably thousands of cottages on the lake. During the summer, the lake and the town's population tripled. It was cottage country, so people would spend all summer enjoying the lake and warm nights around campfires with family and friends. I spent every summer there growing up, and it still brings back fond memories of sunshine and laughter and the sound of motorboats on the lake. But the winters were different. The people that didn't live there all year would venture back home to the city life, leaving the area mostly deserted, with cottages boarded up for the winter. There were a few people that still frequently would come up every couple of months for a few days or so, but for the most part, the lake was silent during the winters, and the town was just filled with locals. The beautiful pine trees are always covered with snow, making the forest quiet. Our cottage was on a dead-end road. There were about 20 other cottages on the road, with ours being somewhat in the middle. The cottages were quite spaced out, however, with our closest neighbors being too far away to see through the trees. My dad had needed to head up to the cottage to do some painting that my mom had been bugging him to do. It was at the end of February, and it was a long weekend, so I tagged along so he wouldn't be alone and we could spend some quality time together. It was about a 5-hour drive from our home, but turned out to be an 8-hour drive due to the heavy snow. It had gotten dark out quite early, and it was around midnight as we drove through Algonquin Park. It was deadly quiet and pitch black, except for the headlights of the car. We finally passed through the park, with only about 30 minutes left to get to the cottage. It had stopped snowing, and we were both eager to get there. As we turned onto the familiar road, I remember my dad cursing. It hadn't been plowed yet. This wasn't surprising, however. It probably wouldn't be until later the next day that we would even see a snowplow. As we drove down the road, I noticed there was a fresh set of tire tracks. "The Smiths must be up for the weekend," my dad had said. All of a sudden, as we drove around the bend, following the tire tracks, the headlights of the car shone on a white van that was parked on the side of the road. It was almost hidden by the vast trees that were covered with snow. "What the?" my dad mumbled. As we drove past the white van, I remember looking back through the back window and very clearly seeing 2 figures in the front seats, illuminated by our retreating taillights. I told my dad this, and he shrugged. "Maybe they're lost." I nodded, but couldn't help to think about how it was a dead-end road, and why they would feel the need to park there. As we pulled into our driveway, and we started bringing our stuff in, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I couldn't stop thinking about that van and why it was there, with 2 people just sitting in the dark in the middle of the night. It spooked me so much that I begged my dad to let me sleep upstairs with him instead of sleeping downstairs in the room my sister and I usually shared. It had big windows with no blinds that looked out into the blackness of the forest, and my 15-year-old self was already scared of the dark, even without seeing the white van. It wasn't a big deal when my sister was there, but not tonight. As my dad got ready for bed, I sat in the living room reading a book. My dad had turned all the lights off, and I was just using a small lamp next to the couch to try and get through one last chapter before bed. It was so quiet, I could almost hear my ears ringing. I also started to get the feeling that I was being watched. The living room had large windows, also with no curtains, that overlooked the lake, and it was black except for a light or two from cottages across the lake. I shut off the lamp and got up. Now that the cottage was dark, the moon was shining brightly, illuminating the snow. It was beautiful, and I walked towards the window to get a better look. Movement caught my eye, and I remember my heart dropping as I saw two figures down by the back porch, below the window, barely hidden by the surrounding trees. I dropped to the floor and crawled towards the bedroom where my dad was sleeping, my heart in my throat. I wasn't sure if they had seen me or not. I woke my dad up, and by the time he got to the window, the two figures were gone. Where I had seen the two figures, two sets of footprints in the snow led back around to the front of the cottage and back down the driveway. I begged my dad not to go outside. He double-checked the locks and turned on the porch lights, hopefully to scare anyone off. My dad wasn't as freaked out as I was, but still set the alarm before he headed back to bed. I remember being very freaked out, and I lay there all night next to my dad, terrified I'd look out the window and see someone staring back at me. The next morning, my dad went outside and confirmed that there were two sets of footprints leading from the road to behind our cottage, and then back around to the front of the cottage and back up the road. There were tire marks that showed the vehicle had turned around and then gone back up the main road. My dad guessed that they were probably looking to break in and steal stuff as it was in the middle of winter, and not too many people were up at the lake. But they knew we were there. They would have seen our tire tracks leading to our cottage, and my dad's car parked out front. They also may have seen the lamp I had turned on to read, and/or seeing it go off. My dad didn't have an answer to that, and after much back and forth, he called the non-emergency line and reported it. Apparently, there had been some break-ins in the area, and some stuff had been stolen from some cottages that were boarded up for the winter. But again, and I still wonder to this day, why would they be interested in stealing from a house that clearly has people inside it? Our second story is from It's Okay, It's Alright. Ghost experience when I was a kid. I've had a lot of paranormal experiences throughout my life, and this story is one of many. Not sure if I've posted this story before, but here goes. When I was 7, my family, mom, dad, and sister, 5, moved into a one-story house in Los Angeles, California. My mom had always loved this house, but was outbid when it had been on the market previously. Now, a few years later, it was for sale again, and this time, my parents had the winning bid. My mom later told me that when they first bought it, the dining room had been painted black, and she heard the previous owners had conducted seances there. My mom had grown up with her mother using the Ouija board and tarot cards, so knowing seances were conducted there didn't scare her off. We had many experiences in this house, but the one that sticks out to me most is this. My sister and I shared a room, but she usually went to sleep in our parents' room almost every night because she got scared. One night, I was woken up by a tapping on my shoulder. When I awoke, I saw a silhouette of an adult man walking slowly across my room. It was like a shadow on the far wall, and I still clearly remember his profile. He was tall, with a sharp, pointy nose and a strong jawline. I froze. I watched as the man walked slowly and then disappeared. I was terrified and hid under my blankets. I guess that's what you do when you're only 7 years old. I remember pretending to be asleep, not sure if what I saw was a ghost or an intruder. The next morning, I told my parents and they were silent for a minute. That's when I knew I wasn't the only one experiencing things in that house. My father started experiencing severe night terrors, including one night where he thought he was physically fighting someone and he fell through their bedroom's glass window. We didn't live there long. However, when we moved, the paranormal experiences continued as though it followed us. We had only moved a few blocks away to a rental house that we lived in for 1 year before my parents bought another house that was also just a couple of blocks away. It makes me wonder if there is something in that entire vicinity. The experiences we had in those other 2 houses were just as strange as the first house. We had a sudden rat infestation. Our dog died for no reason. Things went missing. We had ghost sightings. And if this all doesn't make me sound crazy enough, I also had experiences with fairies, which I'll save for another future post maybe. But my main ghost story is definitely when I was 7 and was awoken by a ghost man in the middle of the night. I'll never forget it. I love to say that it was my first and only ghost experience, but it was neither. Our last story is from Clyde. My grandpa encountered a wild man while ice skating as a child in rural Idaho. My grandpa was born in the last years of the 19th century and spent his entire life living in rural Idaho as a farmer and rancher. He had tons of old cowboy stories that he would tell us grandkids. Most of them were funny, some were cautionary, but a few were downright creepy. When my grandpa was 6 years old, he, along with his older brother and a gang of kids from nearby farms, decided to go ice skating for the day. At that time, my great-grandpa was working as a ranch hand, and the family lived near Chesterfield, Idaho, now mostly a ghost town. It was a bright and sunny January day in 1902, and though the temperature was low, the sun kept things somewhat warm. They had hitched sleighs to their horses and headed down to the Portneuf River to ice skate. There were 8 kids altogether, and they were excited to show off their new skates from Christmas. Along with my grandpa and his brother, there were the 3 Robinson kids, Tommy Bayer, and the Gooch twins. The best spot to skate was next to the Gooch's ranch. The river there was broad and shallow, so the ice tended to be thicker, and if they did fall through, they would just get their legs wet. The kids spent a couple of hours skating when a loud scream came from a willow bush on a riverbank opposite them. The kids could only watch as a giant man, covered head to toe in thick black fur, came lumbering out of the bushes. It was carrying a large tree branch and was screaming in rage at the kids. They fled towards their sleighs, trying to scramble up the riverbank in their skates. My grandpa, being the youngest, was at the back of the rush. He couldn't get a good foothold because of the skates and fell back towards the ice. The giant was now crossing the river towards them, screaming and swinging his branch. My grandpa was sure that this creature was going to eat him. As my grandpa tells it, "Lady Luck smiled down on me that day by the river. because as the giant was midway across the river, the ice gave way. It only submerged to its shins, but it slowed it down considerably as it tried to get back on top of the ice. This gave my grandpa's brother enough time to jump down and cut the laces off my grandpa's skates. They left the skates and dashed up the riverbank and jumped onto the sleigh. As they looked back, the giant man was cresting the riverbank. To their relief, it didn't chase the sleighs. It just stood there, hollering at the kids and swinging his tree branch. The kids were able to make it back to the Gooch Ranch, where they told their encounter to John Gooch, the twins' grandfather. Word spread quickly in the tiny farming community, and soon a posse was formed to hunt down the beast. Where the kids had been skating, there was found footprints almost 2 feet in length. My grandpa's skates were found near the tracks. They had both been bent in half like horseshoes. The tracks headed west into the nearby mountains. The posse followed them as far as they could, but deep snow prevented their travel any farther. The creature was never sighted in that area again. The story captivated the small community, and soon word traveled across the country of the Idaho Wildman. Here's an image of the newspaper article describing the event. 4th column over, 4th article down. That spring, my great-grandpa decided to buy a ranch in the Little Lost River Valley, farther north in Idaho. My grandpa had many other weird and creepy backwoods stories, but he always said that this encounter frightened him the most. He was sure he would have been killed if the giant hadn't broken through the ice and given his brother a chance to cut his laces. Thank you for listening to Whisperwood Stories. If you enjoyed, don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe down below. Do you have a story that you'd like me to read here? Consider commenting or sending it to whisperwoodsubmissions@gmail.com. The stories in this video were read with the author's permissions. Thank you again for listening, and be sure to check out the original Reddit posts. Want to support me? Check the link below where you can leave a tip if you wish, and remember, don't let the shadows get too close.